Thanks for joining me, everyone. Charles Moscowitz here. David Rubin is my guest. He's coming to us from Israel, former mayor of Shiloah in Israel. David, thanks for joining me today.
You're welcome. Good to be with you.
David, we have some very serious developments emanating out of Iran, threatening to enrich weapons-grade uranium after July 7th, which is in a week, which puts atomic bombs in their hands by the year end. Talk about this specifically and what you know about it.
Yes, well, they have made that very clear, and the fact that they are admitting and publicizing that they are going beyond the limits of enriching uranium, and when I say beyond the limits, I'm talking about the Iran nuclear deal that the United States pulled out of about a year and a half ago, and this is very, very serious because the Europeans are still in this deal. But this is a deal breaker. If you keep enriching uranium, that means that you are planning to develop nuclear bombs, and you are on your way to developing nuclear bombs. So it's a very, very serious threat that they are making here, and it's more than a threat because it's actual action. They're actually doing it.
How is it that the Europeans are still in the deal when they're obviously now openly and brazenly violating its terms?
Well, now's the big test for them. Before they were saying that that the Iranians are keeping the deal, that they're honoring their agreements. Now they can't say that anymore. So it's going to be interesting to see what the Europeans do now. Look, you have to remember, and I documented all this very clearly in my book, Trump and the Jews, that the Iranians have not been keeping any deal that will stop them from getting nuclear power. The rush for the nuclear bomb has been going on for a long time. The deal that they signed with the United States, with the Obama administration, and with the Europeans does not bind them. It doesn't. It binds them only in certain areas of their country. In other areas, they've continued their research. There are certain nuclear research centers that are off limits to the inspectors. So it was a horrible deal. But even that horrible deal, it's now obvious that they're not keeping it. So we've already heard some concern from President Macron of France, and it'll be interesting to see what actually happens now. I know the UK already said, and obviously UK is in transition politically. They'll probably end up with a more conservative prime minister, but they've already put out word that they're not going to stay in the deal either if Iran is so clearly and so blatantly violating the deal.
So then the deal itself was really a phony deal. It essentially allowed Iran to continue to develop their nuclear facilities. They did so without pause, even with that deal. From a political standpoint, the enemies of President Trump are going to blame him for this development because he pulled out of the deal. But what you're suggesting, and this is based upon the deal itself, is that it wouldn't have mattered because they continue to develop their nuclear ability anyway.
That's correct. That's correct. It really would not have made a difference. The only thing is that President Trump pulled out of the deal and made a statement. Because he was in the deal, he wasn't allowed to put sanctions on Iran. Obama gave the regime in Iran billions of dollars in cash, which they've been putting back into that nuclear research program, and which they've been handing out to the terrorists of Hamas and Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad. And all of those terrorist organizations are being supported. The Houthis also in Yemen, who recently attacked Saudi Arabia. So they're creating havoc in the Middle East because of that nuclear deal. The fact that President Trump pulled out of that deal only puts the United States on the right side of history and helps the United States to do what really needs to be done, which is to apply heavy pressure on the Ayatollahs, on the Iranian regime.
Okay, and just to be clear, the United States, from what I've been told, we didn't hand that money over to the Iranians. What we did was we unfroze those assets, which had been frozen since the time of the Ayatollah and the takeover of Iran in 1999, in 79.
So, Charles,
but that's beside the point, because the fact is they had the access to that money and they used it for the reasons that you mentioned.
Charles?
Yes.
I must jump in and tell you, though, yes, what you said is accurate about unfreezing the funds that had been frozen, but it's more than that. Immediately after the deal was signed, and one requirement that the Iranians made, a demand that they made, was that a portion of those funds, which came out to several $billion, had to be brought to them, and it was brought actually on a plane in bags.
Oh yeah, we've seen the pictures. Yeah, big pallets of cash. Now, look, I want to talk about what's going on right now. Iran is on the verge of moving beyond the agreement, as lousy as it was, and they're on the process of enriching uranium. What can be done short of war? Because I do not want to see the United States get involved in a war with Iran. God forbid Israel get involved with a war with Iran. What can be done in terms of a peaceful means to stop this problem?
Look, it would be nice to think that a peaceful arrangement could be made here. I seriously have my doubts. The Iranians are fanatical Islamic fundamentalists who have as their goal to export the Islamic revolution. That's a quote from them. Mm-hmm. They've said it many times. Their revolution was founded on that concept, and they have reiterated that concept many times. So when you're dealing with people who have that goal of exporting the Islamic revolution, and they're using every means possible to do so, I find it hard to believe that we're going to be able to come to a peaceful arrangement with them. I would like to believe that also. You know, I believe in peace and love. I think that's, it's the foundation of the world. If we could get some of the evil people to agree with us, but the bottom line is that there are some very bad people, or as Trump would call them, bad dudes in the world, and they need to be confronted. Before World War II, President Roosevelt, for a long time was trying to avoid getting into conflict. He didn't want to have to confront the Nazis, because if he could avoid it somehow, avoid pulling the United States into it, he was going to do that. Maybe he could find a peaceful arrangement. He wasn't able to. And eventually they bombed Pearl Harbor. And when they bombed Pearl Harbor, that was it. That was the end. And it became clear that evil had to be confronted. And I'm sorry to say that, but that is what has to be done now. They have to be confronted. President Trump at least is confronting them on the political level and on the economic level, and he's doing it in a pretty strong way. Israel has been confronting Iran in Syria, but Syria has been trying to set up bases from which to attack Israel in Syria. And there they wouldn't even need their missiles. They could attack from a lot closer. It's just 40 miles to Damascus from the Golan Heights. So they need to be confronted, in short, and they need to be confronted on every level, militarily, economically, and politically.
David, I would hope that this could be done in a way that would avoid a world war and that would avoid the United States getting involved militarily.
I can tell you, Charles, I'm sorry for interrupting again. I can tell you that the first part of what you said is absolutely possible. It definitely can be done without it becoming a world war, because most of the world realizes that Iran is the bad player here. It's not like they have so many allies in the world. The Iranians, they have Assad in Syria, which isn't much of an ally. They have the various terrorist organizations, but there aren't too many countries. Sure, they get some support from Russia and some support from China, but even the Russians realize that their presence in Syria is very problematic. The Russians aren't going to defend them militarily, so there's no way it would become a world war. But to avoid military conflict, I don't think is possible here.
Well, you see, that was my next question. How is Russia playing this game? Russia tends to be concerned with Russia. They do what they think is best in their own interests. They certainly have had a relatively normal relation with Israel and with Iran. Where are they falling on this? You don't think that they would intervene if there was action taken?
Well, why are the Russians in Syria at all? I believe that the Russians, Putin wants to have influence. That's what's important to him. I really believe that it's a little bit different than the Cold War was. Putin wants to be a player. He wants to have influence. He wants to be respected as a superpower, even if a lot of the world doesn't consider it to be a superpower anymore. He wants Russia to be respected as a superpower. So that's why Putin is getting involved. But I don't think that I think that if Putin really believed that the Iranians were doing good things, then he wouldn't have met in the past week as he did. Well, not him personally, but his national security advisor met with Secretary John Bolton and with their Israeli counterpart. They had a trilateral meeting in Jerusalem just a few days ago, in which they discussed several issues, but they discussed it mainly the Iranian presence in Syria and how problematic it is. Israel is demanding that the Russians help to get Iran out of Syria. And if they don't get Iran out of Syria, then we have made it very clear to the Russians that it's unacceptable and that Israel is going to be attacking the Iranians in Syria. So there was just an attack a couple of days ago. 15 members of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard were killed in that attack. There was a lot of damage done to their facilities in Syria. So Israel is going to continue to do that, and the meetings with the Russians are to make sure that they understand our position, and to make sure that they understand the American position, and to see if they can do something about getting the Iranians out of Syria. And if they're not prepared to make that big push and get the Iranians out and to force Iran out of Syria, then at least we want to have coordination so that they know that we're going to be attacking and they won't have their soldiers or their advisors in the way.
Now, Iran is a very singular state in terms of its adherence to a very particular type of Islam, that being Shia. And it does seem like the Sunni states, particularly Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, have lined up against Iran. Maybe others as well, maybe Egypt, maybe Pakistan. Is it a possibility that there could be a kind of a containment on the part of the Sunni, Arab, and Muslim states to form an alliance even, or perhaps just, if not a containment, an outright military force to counter Iran? And might that include Israel?
Well, it's already happening. The Bahrain conference that just happened also this past week, simultaneous to that meeting of national security advisors, that conference was discussing mostly economic issues, but it was also a chance to get together. And it was Israel and several of the powerful Arab countries, such as Saudi Arabia. And there is a lot of strategic alliance going on right now between Israel and Saudi Arabia and some of the other Persian Gulf states, even though Saudi Arabia is the military power among them. So that I can tell you, I can guarantee you that Israel and Saudi Arabia will continue to have that strategic alliance going forward in confronting Iran. And Saudi Arabia is even stronger on this issue than Israel is. They want Iran to be defeated. They are very concerned about the Iranian attempts to dominate the Persian Gulf, to dominate the Strait of Hormuz, the waterways that they share with Iran.
Now, what about what's going on presently inside Iran? I know that there was an election, and when the Obama administration was in place, they shafted the rebellious people of Iran in favor of the government there, and they tilted in the direction of the more radical element, as well as with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. But they're gone now, and you have an administration that is more supportive of the Sunni side. Not that they're a lot better, but putting that aside, maybe it's an issue of realpolitik here. But nevertheless, what's happening inside? Getting back to my question, what is happening inside Iran? Is there a legitimate and real movement amongst people to get rid of the Mullah regime? And if so, can they be helped?
Well, there is a real movement. It's been going on for a long time, but as you know, the regime in Iran is very repressive. They have really clamped down on the people in Iran and clamped down on any kind of freedoms that Iran once had. There's a movement, but it's not strong enough at this point that it's able to overthrow the regime. So I wish that weren't the case, but that is the case. And the Iranian regime is keeping a very, very tight harness on the people of Iran.
I see. Well, okay, so just to recap here, we're dealing with a very dire situation in Iran. On July 7th, which is actually next week, they will have gone past the limitations of the Iran nuclear deal with regard to enriching uranium, which is only done to create bombs, and they do have a means to deliver those bombs. So it is a direct threat to the state of Israel. It's a direct threat to the surrounding nations of Iran, to Europe, and even to the United States. And we're just discussing here what can be done short of world war and short of hopefully of the United States getting involved. But nevertheless, my takeaway is very, very strong, vigorous sanctions and a real ring of steel around that regime.
Well, I agree with you. The strong sanctions are needed. They need to be as strong as possible. The problem with sanctions, however, is that when you have sanctions, however strong they may be, all that this fanatical regime is going to do is they're just going to transfer funds that perhaps could have been spent on their economy. They're just going to move it over to their nuclear research and their support for terrorism around the world. That's what they do. That's their priority. I don't think they care that much about the people of Iran as long as they don't overthrow them. So, unfortunately, I don't think it's going to change anything in the long run. It applies pressure on them, yes, and that's good. But there's going to have to be pressure of a military nature in order to really stop them from what they're trying to do.
Okay, I just want to, because we're reaching the end of the program, I want to just ask a little bit of a historic question as well. The United States and Israel, with Israel's support, defeated Saddam Hussein in the Iraq War. Saddam Hussein provided a major bulwark against Iran. That might have been a mistake, because without Saddam Hussein there, now Iran has hegemony over probably Iraq, and Syria, and they've expanded because there's no one there to there's no buffer, there's no counterforce. Would you say that's an accurate analysis of the situation?
Yeah, to some extent it is true. Iraq is not what it once was. Iraq used to be a Sunni stronghold. Now Iraq is more and more dominated by the Shiites, and that's mostly the Iranian influence.
Right.
So there is no counterforce. Yes, it's absolutely true. Iraq and Iran sort of balanced each other off there, and that's why, when they were fighting for about 20 years, it actually was a very good thing in terms of stability in the Middle East. Now we don't have that. Now they're trying to take over Iraq altogether.
Right. So as bad as he was, it might have been a mistake to topple Saddam Hussein.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay.
I said at that time that Iran is really the one that we should be focusing our attention on, not Iraq.
Okay, well, that pretty much brings us to the situation where we are today, and it very well may echo situations in the future in terms of the possible dangers that might be associated with toppling Iran. But we'll save that maybe for another day. David, could you let my listeners know where they can get your books and get information about you, or any other information you'd like to impart?
Sure. Your listeners, your viewers can get a copy of Trump and the Jews, or any of my other books, at davidrubinisrael.com, David Rubin, R-U-B-I-N, Israel.com. And there they can get information about all the books, or they could just go directly, if they know the title, they can just go directly to Amazon and type it in.
That's an easy one to remember. Trump and the Jews. All right, David.
That's the latest.
Thanks so much. God bless. Be careful. Be well.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Charles.
All right. Thank you.